Hello, friendly alumni. Welcome back to From Here Forward, your favorite UBC Podcast Network podcast. I'm Carol, and she's Jeevan, my new co-host.
Hello. So last month was Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and you're probably like, girl, it's November. That's frighteningly true. But that doesn't mean we can't talk about breast cancer year-round.
And as women, breast cancer is one of the main cancers that we are almost always concerned about as soon as we learn about it. And it might be a silly thought, but 1 in 8 Canadian women will develop breast cancer in their lifetime, and 1 in 34 will die from it, according to the Canadian Cancer Society.
Those stats are no joke, and it's definitely something that's been on my mind since I was a teenager too.
You know, when the good old puberty phase of my life hit, my mom started telling me the importance of getting my breasts examined earlier than later. And I'll be honest, when I was like 13, 14, I didn't understand why. Because up until that point, I'd only heard about breast cancer in the context of like, if you don't breastfeed, you'll get it. Which at the time, that did not seem relevant to me, nor does it now, but it's still a scary thought. What about you, Jeevan?
Yeah, I mean, it was something I was definitely worried about as a teenager. You hear about it in your social circles, you know people who are affected by it. But honestly, I didn't really have much literacy around early cancer detection or testing at all. It wasn't really something that was talked about. But once I moved into my 20s, I had friends in healthcare who encouraged me to explore early examination for breast and ovarian cancer. And only recently have I realized just how important that is. And now, still, I feel like I have a lot to learn. So today, we're talking to Dr. Stephen Narod, an oncologist and world leader in breast and ovarian cancer genetics research. In the 90s, Dr. Narod was among a team of researchers who discovered the BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes, which was groundbreaking for the future of cancer research.
And as we do in every podcast with every expert, we learned a lot from Dr. Narod from prevention, detection, and treatment of breast cancer. So let's get right into it.
Well, my name is Dr. Stephen Narod. I'm a professor here at the University of Toronto, and I also work as a physician at Women's College Hospital here in Toronto. I work primarily in the familial breast cancer unit, where we see and assess women for high-risk breast cancer, ovarian cancer, and we proceed with the genetic testing and counseling of patients. And that's really been my line of research work in the past 30 years.
Now, if you're like me, you've probably never heard of BRCA1 and BRCA2. In very simple terms, they're mutated genes that can cause cancer.
To add to that, Dr. Narod said that of all the breast cancer genes that have been discovered, BRCA1 and BRCA2 are the most dominant and most impactful on cancer risk. To some people, this might not sound like a big deal, but imagine 40 years ago, doctors didn't have this knowledge, so it would drastically change how they assessed risk of breast cancer and prevention.
This is probably one of the bigger gene discoveries in the past few decades. There was a recent report in Nature magazine that of all the genes in the genome, BRCA1 and BRCA2 were 2 of the 4 genes which were most likely to influence a woman's lifespan. Mutation. However, we spent research over the past 20 years trying to figure out ways that will reduce that risk. We started this work back in 1987, and that led us to identify the position of the gene BRCA1, which was on chromosome 17. That happened in 1994, and a year later, we identified BRCA2. Shortly after that, it became possible to do genetic testing for women and for men to see whether or not they carry the mutation in the gene. We all carry 2 copies of BRCA1 and 2 copies of BRCA2, but only the mutated version, the one that's essentially dysfunctioning, is ones that lead to cancer. And about 1 in 500 women in Canada will have a mutation in one of those 2 genes. But if you do have a mutation in the gene, your risk of breast cancer is significantly increased. For BRCA1, we think it's about 70% over a lifetime. BRCA2 also close to that. The risk of ovarian cancer are much less. For BRCA1, that's about 40% lifetime. For BRCA2, that's about 20% over a woman's lifetime.
Since you started this lifelong work about 30 years ago, Dr. Narod shared how the process of finding mutated cancer genes has changed throughout his career.
It's changed dramatically in the past 30 years. It took us years in 1990. Might take a few days. Today we can do whole genome sequencing, which means take a woman's blood and take the DNA and look at the entire genomic sequence of all the genes in the body, and then we look for mistakes. One doesn't make the conclusion based on one mutation, one person, but if we found several dozen women with breast cancer with the mutation in the same gene compared to none in the control population, that would show an indication that this is an important gene. So we compare the genes of women with cancer to the genes of women without cancer, find ones that stick out in terms of the difference in the frequency of mutations. We did recently, with our team with Mohammed Akbari, find the latest breast cancer gene, a gene called ATRA. To do that, they studied over 30,000 women. It's much rarer than BRCA1 and BRCA2, and the effects on breast cancers are smaller. So by using modern technology, we have a more refined tool to find rare genes and genes that are less powerful. 30 years later, of all the breast cancer genes which have been discovered, which may be about 20, BRCA1 and BRCA2 are the most dominant, the most important, the ones that have the greatest impact on cancer risk. They're also the genes that cause both breast and ovarian cancer. So there's a dual function here that we have to correct in order to reduce or eliminate the risk of breast cancer and ovarian cancer.
Early detection is an extremely important part of breast cancer research because it may mean less treatment, less recovery time, and even a better chance at survival. Now, people all around the world can get a genetic test to determine if they're at an increased risk for breast cancer and hopefully receive early treatment. Science is pretty cool, kids.
I hate technology, but it's in these moments where I am very grateful for it.
Well, I think we have some pretty good means of prevention. I think the most important challenge today is to see that we can identify those women who have a mutation before they develop cancer. So each province has their own protocol, referral to a genetic counselor, discuss the risks, getting a genetic blood test to see if you have a mutation. And I think so far we're kind of lagging behind our ability to identify all the women in Canada with a mutation. There are several ways getting around that now that have changed over the past 20 years. In many centres, for example, in Princess Margaret Hospital in Toronto, they offer to test all women with breast cancer at the time of diagnosis rather than some just selected high-risk women. The problem with that is, if you rely on waiting till they get cancer to do the test, and kind of the cat is out of the bag. We would like to identify the women before they have cancer so we can step in with our preventive measures. To that end, we developed at Women's College Hospital a program called the Screen Project, where anybody in Canada, men or women, regardless of their family history, can get a genetic test by going online to the Screen Project at Women's College Hospital. The difference is that requires out-of-pocket payment. The current cost is about $300. I think it will be a long time, if ever, that the government will step in and offer genetic testing free of charge through the healthcare plans to all women. So there are many women who go to the genetic counselor and are found not to be at high enough risk to warrant a genetic test. And so they're more or less told, rely on screening. Many of these women who wish to have the genetic test come forward, go to the Screen Project, and the genetic test is done. We're doing about 1,000 a year in Canada, which is significant, but I think we could really wrap that up if the message got out. The message that genetic testing is available to everybody, and they can have that done through their home. We ship them a kit, they spit into it. It goes to a laboratory in the United States that we partner with, and I get the results in 2 to 3 weeks. And if those that are positive, we then hook them up with a local genetic counselor, and we do the counseling ourselves here from Women's College Hospital. I think that's a really important development.
Prevention is as important as the ability to accurately detect and diagnose someone with breast cancer. I mean, how can we reduce mortality rates associated with breast cancer without the actual methods of prevention? Unfortunately, modern medicine hasn't made many strides on the preventative measures, so the best method is still surgical.
So for breast cancer, we really don't have a good preventive strategy. So the woman has a choice between screening. We do screening with MRI, which is a more sensitive tool than mammography. So they get screened every year from age 30. About 65% of women will go for the screening route. The most effective way of reducing the risk is bilateral preventive mastectomy, where one has the breasts removed in order to prevent the cancer in the first place. We've been still looking for our means of prevention. We haven't really identified a way, a drug, for example, that can reduce the risk of breast cancer.
But Dr. Nayrod said there are some preventative options for ovarian cancer, which, according to Ovarian Cancer Canada, impacts 1 in 75 women in the country.
For ovarian cancer, we do have some prevention, which would be oral contraceptives, reduce the risk of ovarian cancer almost in half if you take it for 5 years. We also have a new recommendation or technique that was really developed out of UBC by Dr. David Huntsman and his colleagues, suggesting that ovarian cancers really originate in the fallopian tubes connecting the uterus to the ovary, and that one can reduce the risk by removing the fallopian tubes without removing the ovary, which is a big advance in the sense that the woman doesn't go into menopause. And, many of these women will even recommend the oophorectomy at age 35 or 40. There really hasn't been a good screening test that works. We did a big study in Poland where we compared the risk of women who had annual ultrasound of the ovaries, checking for tumors, and women who didn't, and found out that the chances of dying of ovarian cancer were still quite high, even if the cancer was detected by the ultrasound. So it's no longer considered a key recommendation in the prevention of ovarian cancer. So for that, we're really left with surgery. At Women's College Hospital, we actually do both. Most women are up for the bilateral salpingo oophorectomy, which removes the fallopian tubes as well as the ovaries. Some women are opting for removal of the tubes only, possibly with a revision of removing the ovaries at the time of menopause. That's a theoretically a good option, but we don't have hard data yet to show how effective it is. Where we've studied here at Women's College Hospital, thousands of women who have had their ovaries removed preventively and found out that the risk of dying of breast cancer or ovarian cancer dropped precipitously. So essentially, the risk went from 40% to about 2% with the ovarian surgery. So that's still, I was hoping that by now we discover ways of preventing cancer that didn't involve surgery, but we're still on the hunt for that.
Not to make this about me, but were you just as shocked to hear that oral contraceptives can reduce risks of ovarian cancer?
Oh, definitely. I was shocked to learn just how much it can prevent it. Reducing risk by almost half with consistent use feels like something I definitely should have known before.
Well, that's been known for quite a long time, and it's known in the general population as well. I think, this is women without mutations. The drop is quite important. However, we don't think that the result is strong enough, compelling enough to use oral contraceptives in replacing ovarian surgery. So the recommendation pretty well across the board in North America is to have our ovaries removed. Our goal is to try and reduce the risk of death as much as possible. And we've seen, the risk of death declining dramatically with the ovarian surgery.
The key in Dr. Nayrod's statement is some quote-unquote prevention, since removing the fallopian tube might be good in theory, but there's not enough data to show how effective it is.
We're still waiting for the results to see if we can get a similar effect removing fallopian tubes only. It's based on the observation that it's believed now that ovarian cancers, which we traditionally thought were originated on the surface of the ovaries and the epithelial cell there lines the ovaries, now the focus is shifted more towards the fallopian tubes. That's because if we find the cancers very early, when we do preventive surgery, we often find cancers or early forms of cancer in the fallopian tubes, and the ovaries are clear. So that led us to believe that maybe the fallopian tube was the culprit and the origin of the cancerous cells.
But Dr. Nayrod assured us there's lots of promising work being done to find even more preventative options.
There are a couple of studies going on with drugs like denosumab, which is a drug used for treating osteoporosis, to see if it prevents breast cancer. There's some pretty good indications that it does. There's a study going on now. Some people at the University of Pennsylvania are trying to develop a vaccine that is a preventive properties as well.
So we all know medicine is constantly evolving. I literally sound like a sales rep. But this is what Dr. Nayrod said about his hopes for medicine in the years to come.
Yeah, some of the questions, what I hope that really didn't materialize. Screening for ovarian cancer with ultrasound or CA-125 hasn't been proven to be effective. We thought originally that that might be a pretty good strategy for preventing death from ovarian cancer. That has not panned out. So pretty much the universal recommendation remains oophorectomy. However, the surgery itself has improved a lot. Here at Women's College Hospital, we do that as a one-day procedure. The woman has their ovaries removed through an incision. You get a belly button, and they go home the same day. In terms of finding the genes, we found the genes that cause breast cancer. I think it's, unlikely that we're going to find any new genes that really impact on breast cancer. The last couple of genes that have been found, the mutations are rare and the risk is pretty small. I think really it's only one can restrict genetic testing to 3 genes, BRCA1, BRCA2, and PALB2, which is the third most important breast cancer gene. And that would probably cover most of the turf. Generally now the panels are between 20 and 30 genes. And many of these genes we really don't have that much of a handle on. So I think, they may be eligible for MRIs, which is a good thing. In general, women with those mutations, other than BRCA1, BRCA2, and PALB2, the risk of cancer is probably not high enough to warrant a bilateral preventive mastectomy, although some women choose to do it. There are also another group of high-risk women would be fall through the cracks. Those women who've had Hodgkin's disease as children and received radiation treatment for it. It's estimated that their lifetime risk of breast cancer is as high as 35%. And there's some question around whether or not that's high enough to warrant a preventive mastectomy. The biggest thing, of course, we would have liked to identify medication that could be taken in a preventive sense, which could eliminate the risk of cancer of the breast and ovaries. So far, that hasn't materialized. And I've been looking at that for 25 years. There's some evidence vitamin D may be helpful. We've recently written a paper on that. 1,000 units a day of vitamin D is something we recommend as well.
As scary as the topic can be, it was fascinating and honestly comforting to sit down with an expert who has changed the face of breast cancer prevention and treatment. No biggie, right, Carol?
Oh, 100%. Once it's payday, I'm definitely going to check out Dr. Nayrod's The Screen Project, which is the initiative that he's associated with that allows you to see if you are at an increased risk of having the mutated BRCA1 and 2 genes for an affordable price. If you want to learn more about this, we've linked it to our show notes. Last thoughts, Jeevan?
Agreed. As usual, I am eagerly waiting for that direct deposit to hit.
Amazing. Love to hear it. Thanks everyone for listening, and make sure you catch our next episode by subscribing or following our show on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're feeling your feels, please drop us a review. You can find me on Twitter or X now at Carol Eugene Park.
And me at Jeevan K. Sangha. From Here Forward is an alumni UBC podcast produced by Podium Podcast Company.